Well, hello and welcome to another Travel Tales. This one is a trip to the Isle of Arran, which is off the west coast of Scotland, and it's an island that's nearly 20 miles long, 10 miles wide, and right round the circumference is about 55 miles, that's 92 kilometres. And the island rises to a height of around 2,866 feet, which is 874 metres. That's at the summit of Goat Fell. So we were there for a short time, and this is just a few impressions. And of course it was at the time of the coronavirus restrictions and so on. Okay, are you sitting comfortably? Then we'll begin. It had been 14 months, virtually confined to the house, apart from walks, during the coronavirus pandemic. We were told on all sides that being in our 70s put us in the population group most vulnerable to the ravages of the virus, and so we were fastidious and obedient. Not until May 2021 were we both finally fully vaccinated and able to book a week in a farm cottage on a hill above the sea on the Scottish Isle of Arran. Our son, when he was a child, had a blue budgie that would not venture out of its cage, even when the cage door was open for him to come out and fly. We now had an understanding of how little Joey felt. We were about to leave to drive the 5 hours from Lancashire up to get the ferry from Ardrossan on the west coast of Scotland to Brodick on the Isle of Arran, where we belatedly noticed, though, the paperwork. It said we needed to be able to show a negative lateral flow test on arrival to ensure we were not bringing the coronavirus onto the island. We had never done this test before and did not possess a home testing kit. There was the tiniest sprinkling of panic as we rang our son for advice. Within minutes he arrived with 2 tests and took us calmly through the procedure. He warned us we may gag a little as we swabbed our tonsils with a furry-ended stick, and we certainly did. Sticking the same swab up your nose is not a pleasant affair, but finally we put the results into the little plastic container and waited 30 minutes for the results. This was the first time our son had been into our house since the pandemic began, and it was a special 30 minutes of talking with him face to face in the same room at last. The results were negative, and he did something on his phone to register this, and instantly the NHS sent us a text saying that we did not have the virus. So we could now travel with impunity to Scotland, albeit with masks and hand sanitisers. We were at the ready, finally, after all this time, and we were now able to hug our son. It was an emotional moment after all that time. But no sooner had we got our hugs with him back than we were saying goodbye as he waved us off. Ironically, throughout our journey to the remote cottage on Arran, we were never once asked to produce evidence of vaccination or negative test. Going away from home was all a bit of a shock to the system. The 5-hour drive was fine, but visiting the motorway services for the first time in over a year showed us how much confidence had gone. With the demeanour of 2 nervous rabbits, we crept about through swathes of travellers who were munching McDonald's, chatting and smoking, apparently without a care in the world. It was the same on the ferry. A huge Caledonian McBrain, black and white monster, whose cavernous mouth opens high and wide to disgorge endless numbers of cars and lorries and receive new vehicles to carry them across the Firth of Clyde to the magical misty Isle of Arran. The steep metal steps up from the car deck require holding on to the rails, virus or not. And after all, we are vaccinated, but old habits die hard, and we have heard that we could still be carriers. To be fair, we cut less than carefree figures at that moment. The hurly-burly of a crowded ship was really challenging to our tenuous peace of mind. It reminded me of when I'd departed from the Buddhist retreats where I had meditated in silence for a week. Our meditation teachers had prepared us for returning to the world and had explained how frenetic and loud it would all seem as we adjusted back into normal life. And this is how it was for us as we queued in the lines of cars to board the ferry. All of human life was there, which felt a little like an assault on our senses for both good and bad. In the car next to us, a man who looked like an ageing, little-known session man for the Rolling Stones, with a small red scarf around his neck, was smoking an exotic cigarette about 1 metre from us. It reminded me of my early student days, when the French cigarette's disque bleu was seen as impossibly romantic, as we had immersed ourselves in the song poetry of Leonard Cohen and felt very hip. In the car next to him were a young couple who were turning their car into a full-blown dance club. It was literally throbbing with incredibly loud dance music, house music. The man was in his 30s with a baseball cap adorned with sunglasses and the regulation tracksuit studded with logos. It was quite a long wait for the ferry to sail in and dock. So many people had left their cars to stretch their legs, visit the ferry terminal, or walk their eager dogs, particularly as the sun was out, tempering the sharp wind that was coming off the sea. One man was pacing to and fro, with his mobile clamped to his ear, talking loudly, and seemingly unaware that bored people in the rows of cars had nothing better to do than listen in. As he walked past us, gesticulating with his free hand, I could hear him say, "Oh, it's been terrible, to be honest, mate. I've been up all night some nights, till 5 a.m, just going over and over it in my mind. Should I do it? Shouldn't I do it?" And then he walked out of earshot, and I was left tantalisingly uninformed as to the nature of his taxing dilemma. A car drew up in the drop-off area, and a young man with long curly black hair, glasses and a beard jumped out, going to the boot and getting a rucksack out. He wore sandals and socks. 3 elderly white-haired ladies also got out of the car, and they all looked to be wishing to hug him. They all stood talking with the young man, seeming to be saying goodbye to him. Every now and then, one of them would step forward, looking as if to hug him, and he would nimbly hop a step backwards, smiling and talking, but nevertheless having none of it. This continued until it looked to me like a little-known Morris dance they were all performing. The old ladies never managed to ensnare him, and he skipped away to the ferry with his rucksack as they waved. Elsewhere there were quite a few children, excited, running about because they were coming on holiday at last. One was called Freya and had tights of ringed multicolours. Her father was constantly calling her back, hence I knew her name. After our prolonged lockdown house arrest, it was quite energising to see many young people striding or jogging about in that easy physical way of the young. They do not make a noise or groan when standing up or sitting down. They just spring about at will, effortlessly. I continually practice Qigong to keep some of that springiness in old age, but sometimes I creak a little. On the boat, bemasked, I had the first glass of beer that I had imbibed since the pandemic had begun. I sat looking at it with relish for a short while. It was the colour of honey with a creamy foam topping. At last I took up the glass and glugged it down with great enjoyment. It was just a kind of, coming home to something familiar experience, to be in a bar and have a beer. I did not need another. I still could not shake off that social isolation vibe, but we were gradually getting used to being in a bar with a lot of other people milling about, even if half the seats were taped off with the kind of tape that police use when there's been a murder. But this was to enforce social distancing, of course. We went up on deck, breathed the air, and watched as we came closer to the mountains of Arran, across the sea. It was wondrous to be on the sea again, and we scanned the waves fruitlessly for dolphins or whales. Just the odd seabird skimming across the waves. As we drove off the ferry with that alarming metallic bang, we turned right and followed the coast road through the villages and the most gorgeous remote countryside of Arran, where already we had seen 2 buzzards wheeling quite close to us. It was 15 miles to our cottage, and the island, is about twice as long as that. There were bluebells, like a blue haze, among grasses along the narrow tarmacked road. We climbed higher into the hills and finally turned into the unmade track of the farm that was to be our destination. Our cottage was spectacular, with French windows and a patio. Grassy meadows gave way to rolling hills, leading the eye to the sea, about a mile away as the crow flies. Far out to sea was the incredible rock of Ailsa Crag, rising out of the sea like a giant inverted soup bowl. We were here. The farmer's family have farmed this piece of land for over 400 years, his wife told us, as we brought in our copious bags of food and belongings for the week. The air was pure, the sun was out, and the sea was blue, blue as Frank Sinatra's eyes. After a night of squashing together in a double bed, rather than the king-size one at home, I was a little frazzled on our first morning in the cottage. Definitely time for me to get back on the diet. I had felt pinned to a narrow section of mattress and dare not move, as I did not wish to disturb my slumbering husband. The duvet was hot and plentiful as I inched around under its claustrophobic grasp. At last I found a position on my side, with eyes staring sleeplessly at the wall which was only about 6 inches away. Finally dropping off for about half an hour, I awoke and inched around once more, as imperceptibly as I could manage. The night wore on in this fashion. High on an island hill farm in the middle of nowhere was eerily quiet and dark, with no light pollution outside. I crept to the window and looked out, and really I was just amazed at the moon, huge, full, shining on the sea. It really was, it was just such a miraculous sight. Suddenly the water tank made a crack, a sound that metal makes when it's cooling down. To my urban ears it sounded for a moment like a gunshot, and I jumped like a startled cat and slid back into bed. In the morning the dawn came very early, and the birds began to twitter by about 4:30 a.m. I was looking forward to my bowl of Scottish porridge oats. I mixed the oats with milk and water in a saucepan and turned on the electric hob. Then followed a puzzling battle between my fingers touching the hob, controls, and strange flashing, but no heat. Paul and I searched for the instructions and found that it was an induction hob. Ugh! I knew nothing of this. It seemed intent on resisting our efforts to make it work. Apparently you must have the correct saucepan, and it must fit the heating area exactly. If you happen to move it slightly as you stir, it has a hissy fit and stops working. It's almost impossible to turn down from the chosen heat. To cap it all, the instructions said, quote, "If you have a pacemaker, you should consult your doctor before using this hob," unquote. Well, we do not have such a medical device, but the effort of understanding and using this nightmarish appliance could have rendered us needing one. We had wrongly selected some superior brand of porridge which boasted of jumbo oats. These large and chewy oats proved almost impossible to render soft, and we would have to burn them to get them even remotely soft. So, as I chewed at my al dente porridge, I was worrying about how we could actually manage to cook any meals this week. A novel approach to weight loss. Later, the sun, reflecting on a perfect sea, as if we were in Greece, had given way this morning to grey skies, pouring rain and strong winds. Our amazing view from the cottage was truncated. Ailsa Crag, which when I got closer to it I realised looks like a giant angular obelisk rising out of the sea, was now invisible through the mist and rain. Undeterred, we drove the 10 miles to the beautiful little seaside village of Lamlash to get some washing up liquid. I imagine that Scottish Island folk are a lot more organised with their shopping when it's a 20-mile round trip to the shop. Oh, the sun soon came out again, and we strolled along the sodden grass by the beach, hearing the lapping waves with the pleasure of those who have not been able to be by the sea for 14 months or more. Out to sea we could see the great wooded and granite island known as Holy Island. There's a Buddhist community on Holy Island, and a few years ago we had taken the small red and white ferry boat there. We had walked around the edge of the island, encountering at regular intervals beautiful brightly coloured paintings of Buddhist figures on the large rocks carelessly thrown down by volcanic action millions of years ago. At that time I had bought an extraordinary woolen hat there, knitted on the island. It resembled a dark green temple with ear flaps, and it readily converted into a balaclava when needed. However, the pandemic had stopped visits to Holy Island, and the little red and white ferry was moored idly some way from the shore. We returned to the cottage to do battle with the inscrutable hob. I was overcome with joy when Paul mastered it and produced a delicious stir-fry. As we watched the deep orange and pink clouds reflect the setting sun, we were content, and soon the bright silver moon rose and threw once again a golden light across the black rippled sea. As I lay back with a cup of coffee, I closed my eyes and a vivid image came back to my mind. Earlier in the day, we had driven down a steep, winding lane, plunging through dense woods. We came suddenly upon a rocky wooded stream as we rounded a sharp bend to see a large bird of prey taking off vertically in front of our car, startled by our arrival. We could see its golden underparts, its legs still hanging down from the takeoff and wings upwardly outstretched. The magnificent bird passed over our car and disappeared from view. But I asked Paul, "Did you see leather thongs hanging from its legs?" Paul had also thought he'd seen them and thought they were the jesses that falconers use on their birds. We still can't decide if they were jesses or rough autumn-coloured leg feathers, but we suspected the magnificent bird was a hen harrier and was certainly a blessing to our eyes. So that's episode 1 of 2 episodes, and I'll read the final episode tomorrow. So I hope you've enjoyed it and hope you're well, hope you're coping with all that life is throwing at you. Namaste. See you later.